This is a continuation of the episode before where I was attempting to service the lower unit on the Nissan 70B outboard. I had several difficulties in removing parts and finally gave up and found another one on eBay. The new one does match up and it already had all the internal parts installed, but I wanted to change a few things and just look to make sure that everything is okay before reinstalling it. All of the seals were in place, and I was going to be replacing the water pump impeller anyway, which is very easy to get to. It's just a couple of bolts on the top. I was already really good at taking the other lower unit apart, so I knew that this wasn't going to be difficult. I was also going to reconnect the linkage for the shifting mechanism once it's all back in place and reconnect the roll pins. As you remember, the issue that started it all was when I went to drain the lower unit oil. I found that the drain screws were seized up, specifically the bottom one. I couldn't get it out, and I ended up destroying the lower unit trying to remove it. So before I even started, I just made sure that the screws would open and close and that the gaskets on them were good. And then I was able to proceed on to the next part, which was going to be replacing the water pump impeller. Once the lower unit is removed from the power head, it's really easy to get to the water pump and the impeller to service it. I was able to find one online pretty easily actually, and then once I just loosened the 4 bolts that were holding the top of the impeller housing on, they came right off, and then everything just slid right off of the drive shaft. Once you loosen the bolts and then go to remove that housing, you'll see there's a little bit of resistance. That's just because that rubber seal rides over top of the drive shaft, and there's a larger area that has some resistance. Also, make sure to note that you'll see that there's a little keyway. There's a woodruff key that is on the drive shaft, and you want to not lose that. Also, take note of the direction of the vanes of the impeller, because that shows the rotation, and when you put it back in, try to have the vanes facing the same way so it doesn't reverse upon itself. It probably won't hurt anything, but I always try to keep it going the same way as I removed it. Then I was trying not to spend a ton of money on this, so I know I can order all these different gaskets and everything, but what I ended up doing was picking the best of the two. I had one from the other lower unit and then this one, and it actually seemed to be in pretty good shape. So I just kind of cleaned up the housing, and there's that little key that fits right in that spot there. I cleaned up the housing and then put it all back together. And I guess if I do another service on it in another 100 hours or whatever, I'll probably get new parts for it. But I just want to make sure that this thing runs and that it actually is going to be worth all my while. So once I got everything cleaned up, I put the gasket back on, taking note of the profile, and it also has little pins that it rides over top of. At first it was difficult to get it on there, but if I pulled out the key and then put the gasket down, then put the key back, it worked fine. Here I'm using those pliers that don't touch to remove the old impeller, and I had something really cool happen. There was a package at my door, and one of my viewers from Pennsylvania, a wonderful man named Bud, sent me a new pair of pliers and also some roll pin punches. He said, "It was paining me to see you do these videos with defective tools," and so he sent them to me, and I thought that was awesome. So thank you very, very much. I'll use these to put the roll pin back in to the linkage for the shifter. I couldn't wait to use my new pliers. This is what the new impeller looks like, and you can see it has that little keyway in there. I did not make a video of me putting it into the housing because I needed both hands, but basically I just put some dishwashing soap on it and bent the vanes over one at a time and just pushed it into place, and it was not difficult. It just took a second. This is what the new water pump impeller looks like when it's installed in the housing, and I still have to remove the little piece of gasket that's hanging off of there. Once you slide it back down over the drive shaft, take care to align that notch that's cut out in the impeller with that woodruff key. There is some resistance, so I tried to tap it into place. I didn't want to damage anything, but it's kind of hard to just push on by hand. I don't have a torque wrench, so I just snugged all the bolts up evenly, about as tight as I thought they should be. Initially, I said I was going to buy a new pair of pliers that actually touch once I get to 1,000 subscribers, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a torque wrench, because I already have the pliers now, thanks to Bud from Pennsylvania. Lastly, I wanted to ensure reliability, so I painted it the same color as a Yamaha. Now it's time to install the lower unit. The first thing I did was I made sure that the spline is clean, and I put some marine grease on it where it attaches back up into the power head. I just kind of smoothed it around and then lifted it up into place. Okay, I have to be honest, I made a mistake here. The smaller diameter rod is the shift linkage, and it should be disconnected from that drift pin down by my wrist. This is the new lower unit, and it already came with that longer piece on it. So I actually installed it, and then I wondered why I couldn't get it connected. It was because the other one was already in there. I edited that out. And I found that the easiest way to do it, at least for me, was once I get it positioned, is I put a ratcheting tie-down strap around it, because the lower unit is pretty heavy. And that helps to take the pressure off of it, and I can get it set and make sure that the spline's all engaged before I start putting the bolts in. After I took that longer piece off, that's what it should look like. And when I go to put that back in, I use the ratcheting straps to help pull everything together, and that's where the drift pin goes in right there. When I went to pick up a wrench, I burned my hand, and I figured out why. It was 162.8 degrees sitting in the sun. That's how strong the sun is down here. So I had to wrap a paper towel around it to use it as kind of like a pot holder. It really was too hot to hold on to, so maybe at some point I'll get a canopy or a garage to work on, but right now I'm just out in the yard. Another thing that I always do is when I'm reassembling things and putting the bolts back in, I always put a little bit of grease on them just to keep them from seizing up. These weren't too bad when I took them out, but it's 30 years that they've been sitting in water, so I figured it couldn't hurt. To help turn the drive shaft to get the spline lined up, I did put the prop in place, and it made it a little bit easier to wiggle it back and forth. Then once I reassembled all the parts, it was time to torque it down. Something that was interesting was that the old lower unit that I had a hole drilled in the shaft for a cotter pin, and this had some sort of a washer that you kind of peen the ends over. So once I got that done, then I snugged it up as best as I could. Once again, without a torque wrench, but maybe the next time I do this, I'll have one. When I went to bend the tabs down, I was going to use a steak knife from the gas station and the back of a wrench, but then I was realizing I have the right tools now, thanks to Bud from Pennsylvania. So I selected the right size roll pin punch and tapped the ends down, and what do you know? It's nice having the right tool. Thank you, Bud from Pennsylvania. Next, I used my internal torque wrench to tighten the prop nut to the recommended specification of 28.92 foot-pounds, which is right about there. Next, it was time to change the lower unit oil. I wasn't sure if there was oil in there or not, so I was going to take out the drain plug and at least replace it with some new stuff. Once I got it in place, I saw that there was some in there, and I needed to drain that first. Whoops, let me get a little something to put in here. Apparently there was still a lower unit juice in there.
You can see how it flows differently once you remove the drain screw. And there's also a little magnet on here that has all the little filings that it will remove that are in the oil. So we'll get that nice and cleaned up. Both of the screws have it, the little magnet on the end. So let this drain out, and then we're going to find out which of the 3 fittings fits this and screw one in, and then it connects to this, and then this will connect to the bottle of oil. So we'll let this drain and we'll come back to it. Alright, while that's still draining, I've attached the pump to the top of the oil, and just make sure that it is a lower unit oil. And then this is the correct size according to this up here. So screw this onto here. And then this attaches to here. I know it's still dripping a little bit, but we're going to get on with things. Okay, it goes on there. Once that's hand tight, you want to fill the lower unit from the bottom up. So we start pumping the oil, and you see it coming through, and we're going to fill this from the bottom up until it runs out of the top where it says oil level.
This lower unit took just a little bit less than a quart, and I gave it a couple extra pumps to get the air bubbles out and force any of the old oil out of the top. Once you put that drain vent screw back in, it has a rubber gasket, and it kind of creates a vacuum, so when you remove the lower one, it doesn't all just come gushing out. You just remove it, and then you can put your finger over it and put the screw back in. Once you put that top vent screw back in, you can remove the lower filling plug that you put in and just screw the bottom screw in and tighten it up, and just make sure that you don't have any leaks anywhere, and you're good to go. It's kind of ironic that this is the first thing I was going to do when we got the pontoon boat, was just drain the lower unit oil, but it showed me that there were some other issues that needed to be addressed, and they're all taken care of now, and we have a nice lower unit and fresh oil in it. And now we can go on to the next project. Incidentally, if anybody has a Nissan NS70B or C and they need parts for the lower unit, send me an email at randomlyawkward1@gmail.com. You can have them, just pay for shipping. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting my channel.